I need to figure out what happened. I have to know.
My father died on September 11th, and then I found out shortly after that you had some experiences with 9/11. What is that process of confirming deaths on September 11th?
40% have not been identified. That means that they were so vaporized, so instantaneously killed, that there's nothing for us to test. We found a chest cavity with a jawbone in it from someone else. I may have even met your father. I don't know. I worked recovering remains in the rubble. Thousands of people. I don't know who I touched. I really don't.
I would love if you introduce yourself for whoever the hell is listening to this podcast, and so they get a little bit about you, and then we'll jump on in there.
All right, good.
Feel free.
You ready? Yep. Hi, David. I'm Barbara Butcher. I've been a death investigator for nearly 30 years. And I recently wrote a book called What the Dead Know that describes my adventures in the field.
Adventures is an interesting way of putting it. I'm sure those adventures have its ups and downs, because I feel like in a field like yours, it's my perspective and interest in this is for, I know my audience, I usually speak to a lot about, grief, loss, but near-death experiences, all this stuff. But it's the overall arching experience of death, which is an adventure, as you say. There's so many different aspects to it, and your experience seeing it in such a brutal way, and I want to say a true nature of human beings, which this continually happens, let alone New York City or anywhere else, which we are. So what is that experience for you, and how is it intertwined in your life? Because how many scenes of death, if you will, for lack of better terms, have you experienced in your career?
I've investigated. I was with the New York City Medical Examiner's Office. And so I worked with the police, but, independently doing our investigation to find cause and manner of death. I did 5,500 death scenes, including 680 homicides. The rest were suicides, accidents, the occasional natural death. And it was brutal, but I loved every single minute of it.
What about it did you love?
I'm a nosy person. I mean, nosy is putting it mildly. I have to know. Ever since childhood, kids used to bring me roadkill, and I had a little dissecting kit and a chemistry set, and I would try to figure out how these animals died. Like, this little possum. Notice the little lines across his back. He was run over by a large tire. Excuse me. And it carried through all the way through into adulthood. And I need to figure out what happened. I have to know. So I was a natural investigator. I had a medical background. I was a PA in surgery. And getting this job was like a God shot for me. But most of all, it was the opportunity to do something wildly interesting and adventurous, yet at the same time help people. It was like a double whammy. I certainly couldn't occasionally we prevented a death, but the ability to give answers to people is huge. My boss used to say that people can handle anything except uncertainty and not knowing. Sometimes someone would ask me, like, how much did he suffer? And I'd be inclined to sort of downplay it a little bit. But my boss, Dr. Hirsch, my mentor, my friend, he said, when you speak to a family, you must give them the absolute truth. Because if you lie even a little bit, they'll never trust anything else you say. And your word is your truth. So keep it. And I learned in time how to give bad news in a relatively ungruesome way.
Right.
Just such a word. And so I had the joy of investigation, of working with police, of seeing things that no one else had ever seen. And at the same time, I got to do a little bit of good in the world.
Amen. And the way you're describing that approach of a family that just lost someone in a terrible way, and that human approach of compassion that you said, I think that does apply to so many layers in life of just understanding when something traumatic happens, if it's a death like that, or just grief in general, which is obviously a heavy talking point in my podcast. It's that it's a blend of sugarcoating things, but often that does more harm than good, especially if they eventually find out the inevitable truth. That's one thing. Then if you don't trust someone, how are you going to believe someone moving forward? And it hurts at first, but I think that the head-on approach is a better healing mechanism, in my opinion. It's going to be like a ripping off a Band-Aid, and it's going to sting at first to hear something like that. But I feel like it is important to take that direct approach, especially in a scenario where someone was murdered or something extreme like that.
Yeah.
So we're going to jump around a little bit, but I'm curious about, since you were talking at the beginning of your career, what was the first experience you had with with a murder or a homicide specifically, since that seems to be more traumatic, or the first dead body that you've seen? Do you remember that first experience? And was that kind of an eye-opening scenario, seeing it for the first time?
Not really, but my reaction surprised me. When I went to interview for the job, they took me down to the autopsy room, see if they could shake me up a little bit. Now, mind you, this is back in 1992, and I was the second woman hired for the job in Manhattan, and the first to last more than 3 months.
Wow.
It was a tough man's world, absolutely a man's world. So the guys took me down to the autopsy room, and they thought, let's shock her and see how she reacts. And so on the first table was a man with multiple stab wounds and the knife still in him. Oh. And I said, oh, wow. I wonder if the perpetrator was right-handed or left-handed.
Oh, there it is.
And the forensic pathologist said, oh, interesting you should mention that, because you'll notice the cluster around the heart. And yet, we see the right. And it was very interesting to me. And the guys who had taken me down there just looked at each other like, yeah, right.
That's a hell of a first test.
It is.
I mean, to think of that initially, it's like, that just shows, why you're doing what you're doing. But also, besides that reactionary thing, did you feel you have to, was it instinctual, or was there any emotion to that? Because I wonder, someone to do a job like you, to see that, obviously I'm sure there's time goes by and you become more and more used to it, if you want to say like that, or I don't know what the right terminology is. I don't know if you ever get used to that. Or you tell me.
No.
But what is that transitionary period for you in regards to seeing this all the time? Like, what does that do to someone that's seen, 5,000, 6,000 or so death scenes, let alone 500, 600 murders? Like, what does that do to you when you take it home?
I learned very quickly how to detach myself, how to drop a curtain. Now, for instance, I happened to respond to a scene where a whole family was killed, mother, father, sons, everybody. And the crime scene detective said to me, hey, Barbara, why don't I get started on the mother? You go in and do the kid in the other room. And I went in, and there was a little boy laying on his stomach, about 12 years old, with soft brown curls and golden brown skin, and a little downy cheek, and a Star Wars backpack. And now normally I would be very detached, just drop it. But the sight of this little boy shocked my heart. I feel like it stopped. Couldn't do it. Couldn't detach from the sweetness of this little boy and his brutal murder, gunshot wound to the head. And I stepped out into the room and I said to an officer, excuse me, officer, would you mind coming in here and witnessing my exam? Just in case. And he's like, oh, just in case of what? The documentation of whatever I made up. And he said, all right. And he came into the room, and now I could put on the Barbara Butcher act. Cool, competent, technical, detached. But I needed an audience to act detached in that instance. But most of the time, I was able to drop that curtain. Now, unfortunately, when you go home at night, people are living regular life. They say things like, what do you want for dinner? I don't know. I don't care. Hey, do you think we should go down to Florida and see your mother? Yeah, whatever. Because in my mind is the little boy, is the girl who was raped and strangled, is all these things I'm carrying in my heart. And I would like to step out of my body which has seen, heard, and smelled this, and step into something else. It was very, very difficult.
I bet. It's like two different people.
Oh, yeah, you have to be two different people, the work person and the life person. And it's not fair to our partners by any means because they want to live a normal life. And here we bring home this heavy cloud of tragedy. So when I was first in training, I was watching the autopsy of an 8-year-old girl who had been raped and smothered. And the forensic pathologist, Dr. Jackie Lee, she was doing it very efficiently. And I was like, my God, she's 8.
For exclusive access to bonus content, new episodes, and more, check out our Patreon account for only $5 a month. Link is in the description.
And I said, Jackie, how do you do this every day and still live your life? And she said, listen to me. When you go home, when you leave here, you must surround yourself with things of beauty, art, music, food, love, nature. You have to do it every single day because that is the antithesis of the death, despair, and destruction that we see every day. You want to counteract that. And at first I thought, oh, that's some hippie bullshit. And whatever. Yeah, sure. And but in time, I realized she was right. My life was becoming totally invested in the death and tragedies of others. And so I bought a little house up in the Catskills, a little fixer-upper. Got a dog, 2 cats, and I learned to hug trees, mow the lawn with.
So you became the hippie.
Oh yeah,
I
totally.
love that. It's amazing.
I played with my animals, and I played with my house. I fixed it up, and that brought me immense joy. That was a place where I could go and fully detach. I could become the other Barbara, Barbara A. Butcher rather than Barbara Effin Butcher.
There's so much in there that I think applies to people that aren't in your field, which is obviously a heavy majority. But that when you're going through whatever it is in life, the lowest point. You're not personally the lowest point, but you're seeing the low of life. It's like there is that contrast, and I feel like it's important to see the actual beauty in life that is in there, despite what you're seeing. So if you're in a shitty situation or a shitty experience, it is important to do those things that do bring you joy. And I'm not saying it has to be just not a distraction, but it's just experiencing life in its purest, beautiful form that does exist. So with that, what is your viewpoint on life? Because I feel like me personally that hasn't had these visceral experiences that you've had and witnessed murders and such grotesque events in life, I see it on the bombardment of negativity and social media that I feel like I'm reading a book right now that was talking about how we are bombarded with this negativity as negativity sells, violence sells. And it paints the picture of a world that seems so horrible, which there is horrible events, but it doesn't highlight the beauty of the world that does exist. And I truly believe the majority of the world is beauty. There's so much good in the world, but we just see so much of the bad in this age of technology. So to bring it back to your experience with seeing death so often, but still experience the beauty of life, what is your viewpoint of the world experiencing murder and brutality so often? Like, what do you see the world? Is it like, what lens is that through Barbara when you've experienced such violence?
I'm glad you learned the lesson early. I did not, unfortunately. There's a syndrome common to death investigators, cops, firemen, emergency room nurses, EMTs, that when you see violent death every single day, several times a day, that becomes the norm. Mm-hmm. You see 3 murders, 1 suicide, and a hideous accident. Oh, okay, that's today. And tomorrow is the same, and the next day is the same. It's now the new normal. Then your mind starts to assume that that's the normal for everyone. That's the norm of the world. Everyone you pass has evil in them. Every building you pass is waiting to fall on you. A car is waiting to hit you. It's just the norm. And then something comes along, like a statistic that reminds you that's not true at all. It's not true. The world is not like that. So intellectually, I could say, well, this year the murder rate has dropped down to just under 2,000. That's real good. And my chances of being murdered, of the 8.5, 9 million people in New York, are 2,000 divided by blah, blah, blah. So they're very slim. But that's not what your heart feels. Your heart sees the norm of death every day. And it takes a long, long time to realize that you're wrong, that your feeling is not a fact. It's just a feeling. And so it's only, after I wrote the book, I that was like a way to get that feeling out that I had held in for so long, that the world is evil. And I was able to focus on good things. So my view of the world is it's incredibly messed up right now, especially, that it's sad, tragic, and unfair in the extreme. Why the hell should I be sitting here with decent clothes, food, enough money to live, and talking to you when all around the world people are scrabbling in the dirt for bits of food? How does that compute? Okay, Barbara, calm down. Let's take that and unpack it. You're very lucky and you're very grateful. Can you do anything about that? Sure. In your small way, yeah. Go ahead and do it. And whatever it is, volunteering, giving money, educating people, go do it. Okay, now, what is life? Life is a gift of joy and beauty and wonderment. What do you want to do with it? Sit here and sulk over how bad things are, or go live it as it was intended? So I choose life.
And I think keyword there is choose.
Yeah, choose.
And sometimes it does seem like we have a choice. And I don't think you have a choice on certain events and things that happen externally, but I take with practice and experience, you do end up having a choice to make. And it sounds dumbed down and okay, easier said than done. I said recently, that phrase easier said than done, I'm sorry if I'm being redundant. It's like, what is harder said than done anyway? Like everything's harder done than said, in my opinion. So it's like a stupid phrase anyway, but I say it all the time. But yeah, it is a choice. And I think that, and again, I think you could extrapolate your personal experiences, maybe not relating it apples to apples, but I think that key word that you said is you chose this, even despite this, that, and the other. So there's a reality to the world and there's a reality to how you view things, and the way you view things and experience things is your choice in many ways. So in your book, you mentioned something that this is going to get really personal. I know we discussed it prior, but I'm curious about it. So obviously, my father died on September 11th. And then I found out shortly after that you had some experiences with 9/11, and that was the investigation or search to confirm deaths via the people in the debris. So body parts and whatnot. So obviously this is a very head-on discussion, having lost my father in that ruckus of 9/11. And I remember the first time, not the exact moment, but I just remember hearing it about the confirmation that my dad passed. I feel like it wasn't until years later. There was no need for my family to tell me that at a young age. But it was a weird experience hearing how they confirmed my father died in the towers, where they had to find him. And obviously, as grotesque as it is, they didn't find him in one piece. And that's just like it goes back to the idea of sugarcoating facts and this or that. Like, I don't have to think about that. When I do think about it, it's sad, but it's also, this is what it was. And so I've come to a point in my life where I'm okay talking about it. So what was that experience for you? And what is that process of confirming deaths on September 11th in such a way that, it's not normal, without saying?
No, it's just so abnormal. Let me say first how sorry I am for your loss. For a child to lose their parent is life-altering, but to lose your parent in a major part of history is disorienting. And I'm not surprised at all that you have a podcast about death, because it's life-altering. Here's the thing about 9/11. You may have heard it said that one death is a tragedy and 1,000 deaths is a statistic. No, it's not. When you're walking through the rubble of 2 skyscrapers and there's fire and smoke and rubble all around you, and you're thinking 2,000 dead, 3,000 dead, we don't know yet, maybe 10,000 dead. The tendency is to think in that big number. And then here's what you see in the rubble: a desk calendar that says lunch with Jim, 12:30. I saw one of those pen sets. It's got a golf ball in it, the souvenir of a hole-in-one, a little pen, and it was squashed. Something from a guy's desk that brought him so much happiness. Cards, birthday cards from from their colleagues. The paper was not destroyed. There were acres and acres and acres of paper flying through the air, too light to be destroyed. And so it was all spread out before us. So you saw these things like, scribbled notes, doodles on a scratch pad. And every one of those things tells you this is not 1,000 people. It's not 10,000 people. It's one person, one at a time, a person who was a universe unto themselves. They had family, children, husbands, wives, parents who loved them and formed part of their universe. They did things in the world that maybe changed the world, maybe not, but they were part of something grand. And now, senselessly, they're gone. So there's no such thing as a statistic when it comes to death or a number. Each death is individual, and each death is painful.
Yeah, it becomes personalized, therefore it becomes individualized, like you said. And I think that's it's an interesting perspective, because especially when it comes to 9/11, or like you said, or any tragedy, it becomes on a mass scale, it does become a number. And that number almost not desensitizes it. Obviously it hits you in a grand way. Oh my God, 3,000 people. But it kind of gets lost in the shadows when you look at it from an individual approach. Obviously, my shadows are very obvious. I saw it as an individual thing, and it was both. It was, okay, I lost my dad, so I had that very in-your-face personalized experience. But then I had the experience, but there were still 3,000 other people. So there's like a yin and yang for having my experience, for realizing he wasn't the only one. So there's a balance of compassion, like, am I being selfish, this, that? But I knew I wasn't being selfish, that's my father. So was that the biggest impact of walking through the rubble and seeing, well, I don't know what you'd explain what you saw, but that it made it more individual as opposed to this grand scale?
The personalization of each death was extraordinary. As death investigators, as mass fatality responders or managers, you're trained to think in terms of numbers, because that's how you define your resources and your approach to the situation. How am I going to recover 23,000 body parts? How am I going to identify those people? How am I going to recover them in these extraordinary conditions when there's fire and smoke all around me? So you're trained to think that way, and that's the intellectual head. And then the emotional part of you, the heart sees the little personal things, wedding rings. Oh God, we had to take off the ring and check inside for initials, because that helped us identify someone. Getting DNA from the families, to match to their loved one, that was so damn painful. And that also reversed, in a sense, the plans we had made. We were thinking victims, recover them, recover the pieces. And then in came the families. I have probably met your mother.
I was wondering that.
Yeah, probably, because we had the weekly meetings with the families to catch them up on our progress. I may have even met your father.
How?
I don't know. I worked recovering remains in the rubble.
Yeah. Like that.
Thousands of people. I don't know who I touched. I really don't. Could be 100 people, could be 1,000. And So what reversed for us was to stop thinking about the numbers and the victims in it as much as the families. That's who we're working for. The victim will get justice because we know that this was the biggest mass murder in U.S. history. But the families, they're the ones that need us the most right now. They need us to identify their loved ones and give them something to bury, something for closure. But also, we're there to give them the information about what happened because their imaginations were horrible. You know, did she burn? Was she frightened? Was she crushed? What happened? And with some degree of certainty, we could give people information. Was the death instantaneous, or did it take a little bit? We could sometimes give those figures to families. And horrific as that sounds, it was so much better than what they imagined. Because they imagined, 15 minutes of terror and pain. It wasn't like that at all.
I mean, from the scientific approach, here's my brain talking about this when, if we're talking about my dad being on that site, this is it's a very interesting conversation, to say the least. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's fascinating to me because I'm at a place where I can have these conversations, and perhaps I've been of a certain mind where I haven't shied away from these conversations, and it kind of represents a lot to me to be able to talk to you about this. I don't know what that means to me, but it's just, I think a lot of people are probably feeling uncomfortable right now, and they're not sitting in my seat or your seat. You know what I mean?
Sure.
But I don't know. I'm going to bring this up to my mom and sisters gently at some point that I spoke to you about this. But I think, I don't know if it comes off of me as like I'm not desensitized, but it's just, I think I just ran through this in my head so many times. And now I'm just like talking to you about it. And
It's good to talk.
Yeah, I think so too. And even it goes back to like the discussions you've had with families that have lost someone in a violent way, and not sugarcoating it and tell them directly, like, this is weird to me right now. I'm kind of digesting this live as you guys are listening right now, of having this conversation with someone who was there. And it makes it even more real, even though I knew it happened. But again, it goes back to what you were saying about the imagination. I had an imagination about how this process was. And I think about these processes, even though maybe it has no healing mechanism to my grief, or maybe it does, I don't know. But then again, I'm transitioning to a question that isn't personal, but it is like, what is that process? What is the actual scientific findings of how do you determine in a catastrophe like 9/11 in the rubble if they died a certain way when they're dismembered?
There were some people who showed burns. Some people had smoke inhalation. That's a pretty fast death. Most people I think there were 200 relatively intact bodies. The rest were all in pieces. There's a way to tell if someone suffered a crushing impact before they were dead or after. You see what I mean? Post-mortem versus ante-mortem. If you're alive when, let's say, a piece of concrete falls on you, there's going to be vital reaction. There's going to be bleeding, bruising, there's certain patterns in the tissues that we can look at and tell, was this person alive? And in so many cases, you could see that these injuries, the crushing injuries, were post-mortem. They were already dead from the shock, from smoke inhalation, from all the trauma. And then the body was dispersed into pieces. I think it's very telling that of the 2,300, however many people, I always block it out because it's not good to think about. 40% have not been identified.
40%.
40%. So what does that mean? That means that they were so vaporized, so instantaneously killed, that there's nothing for us to test. Our job was to go into the rubble and remove every single piece of human remains that we could find, and then test it with DNA, with things like wedding rings or a tattoo, because some people were recognizable in some sense. But I will tell you something strange. We found a chest cavity, person's chest, with a jawbone in it from someone else. So what does that tell you? That the force was absolutely incredible, and that maybe they were holding each other when the building collapsed. That's what I like to think. At least they were together.
Right.
And geez, I'm getting chills now. And I think your audience, maybe some people are uncomfortable saying, why is she talking about this to him?
And why is this sicko who lost his dad in that rubble asking questions like this?
Yeah, because I think that's one fault that as humans, most of us have, is that we're afraid to talk about death with people, talk about their sorrow, their grief, because it's painful and we're scared that we're going to upset them. Guess what? They're already upset.
Yep.
You're already upset. You're already going to be in grief for years. And everybody's scared to talk to you about it.
But the reality
is maybe you need to talk about it.
Yeah, and that's why I think, I don't know if I'm trying to show anything or do anything. I'm not trying to I'm not even leading by example. This is just me being genuine about my curiosity on the topic. But I think there is something there that, it's like when you talk about a personal topic like this, someone may feel uncomfortable and not being associated with this event outside of in the public, but I'm here talking to you about it. I'm looking you in the eye and we're talking about it, and it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to be thinking about this over a drink later, of course, but
many drinks, probably.
A few drinks, probably. But nevertheless, it's like it is okay to talk about it. And there is something about confronting it, and it is something about facing it and understand and sitting here right now and just feeling what I feel and thinking how I'm thinking, and I'm okay. And maybe it's because it's been 23 years. I'm sure that is a big thing about it. I'm not saying people that are in their grief right now outside of a 9/11 experience that you have to rush into anything, but I do think it is important to face these conversations, and that's my personal journey. And I think it can be healthy depending on how you receive the information, how I receive the information. Okay, what do I do with it from there? You know what I mean? I think there's choices, as we discussed, from how I receive the information you're giving me. What path how do I want to dissect it? Do I want to dissect it? Do I think about how brutal it was and, oh my God, my dad was there, or do I just accept it at face value and that's what it was and that's okay? So I think having these difficult conversations is the precipice of this podcast in general. Mm-hmm. So I appreciate you telling me that, because this is as personal as it gets. And I appreciate you not sugarcoating, even though I did give you the green light to say, just let it loose. So I appreciate you actually doing that. That's why I saw this when I saw you on your Netflix show. The way you spoke was so matter of fact. And that's why I was excited to talk to you, because I like to think I'm matter of fact about things and I can take it. But to have this face-to-face conversation is just, it's wild to me. This life shit is just wild. Just to be sitting down talking to you about this, it's like, I just want people to know that I'm okay. Not that you're worrying about me, and I hope you're okay. And maybe this is a lesson in having these conversations, because I don't know how more real it gets than what you just told me. And I'm curious about the conversations that you said were difficult of having these talks with the family. Like maybe you spoke to my mom, which is a wild thought in itself. And I'll have to ask her, see if she remembers this. But what was that approach? Because I'm curious to see the reactions you've gotten and how you have these discussions with a grieving family, finding out such details about how they lost their loved one.
I followed what Dr. Hirsch said. The truth is so much easier than what they're actually imagining.
Yeah.
And they need to know. And what my approach to a family, whether it was the World Trade Center or a homicide or a natural death, was to ask them, is there anything you'd like to know? Is there anything you'd like to talk about? And I mean, that goes for our friends too. When somebody loses a parent or someone dies in an accident, people say, I'm so sorry. And they leave it at that. Mm-hmm. I think it might be good to say, is there anything you'd like to talk about? Ask the person. If they say, no, I just want to, be alone with my grief for a minute, fine, great. But if you want to talk, I'm here. Mm-hmm. I think working with the families in this instance was incredibly difficult because they were angry, righteously angry. How dare some lunatic asshole come in here and attack our country, kill our fellow New Yorkers, our friends, our citizens, our families, in such a senseless and brutal way. It was anger. And then we compound that anger with the fact that we can't find your wife, your husband. I'm sorry. We're unable to identify them. What? Why don't you use DNA and everything else? Not that simple. Okay.
Just bang the
Not
mic.
that
Sorry, doing
simple.
my Ajima Genie impression. Go on.
And then at first, I was a little taken aback by their anger. I was like, wow, why are you being so mad at me? But then I realized anger is so much easier than sorrow. And their sorrow was overwhelming. And so to be angry about something and at someone helped them. So I said, all right, it's not personal. I'll take it. And sometimes people ask me very angry questions, why the hell aren't you people working harder, bringing more people in? We're doing our best. And I'd say, I understand. And we're doing our absolute best.
That's a challenge for you, for your profession, too, because you have to have that intellectual mind and more or less detached mind just to do your job. But then it's impossible to ignore the emotional aspect when you're dealing face to face with the families.
Yeah.
That's such an interesting dynamic. Just like from the other side of the coin, the people that are the victims, it's strictly emotional. You're not really getting intellectual about a process like this.
Yeah.
So that approach, I wonder how much of a challenge it is for you. I know you explained how you kind of see the beauty and do your activities and whatnot to enjoy the life and see the beauty, but how does that approach affect your personal loss in life? If you've had, like, how does someone like you grieve when you've seen such? Like, is it completely different, or they tie into each other?
That's such a good question. I don't grieve very well at all. I'm not good at it. When I was probably in my 30s, two of my brothers died, both at the age of, one was 24 and one was 26, heroin overdose and a rare brain inflammation. And I remember we were having a service and all our family was coming and friends. And as I was walking into the church, I said to my sister, don't let them get to you. She was like, what do you mean? I'm like, don't let them see you're upset. And I clenched my jaw and I was angry and I walked in there. And my sister was so puzzled and she asked me years later, what did you mean by that? I said, I have no idea other than I could not accept the grief of losing John, of losing Scott. I had to turn into an icicle.
Barbara fucking Butcher, is that what?
Yeah, Barbara fucking Butcher. Mm-hmm. This was before I even had this job. So I was not good with grief. I'm not good with most emotions, quite frankly.
Is this based on your experiences, you think, or was this something you feel like you've had prior to your occupation?
I think some previous traumas had something to do with it. Yeah, I'm not very good at that.
I mean, it's got to take a certain person to do what you do. Like, is there sure. Is there a borderline? Like, you know what I mean? Like, is there a line where to do what you got to do, you're not on the bad side of it, you're clearly on the good side of it? Like, are you like one breath away from doing what they're doing? You know what I mean? Like, is there like like, I'm not calling you a sociopath, but obviously I'm not doing, you take me with a grain of salt here, but like, is there a fine line to be able to do what you got to do and do what these crazy people are doing in regards to murders? Like, is there a fine line between that?
Absolutely. And I'm so glad you brought that up. You're one of the few people who knows that. In my experience, cops and killers are very, very close. Cops and criminals, one stands on this side of the line, the other stands on that side of the line, but that's a thin line.
Yeah.
Running around, shooting, hitting. Those can be criminal acts or good acts to help people. Firemen, how close are they to pyromaniacs? Being in a fire, the beauty, the excitement of it, the danger. That's what pyromaniacs love too.
Yeah. So
I think, medical legal death investigators, how thin is the line between us and murderers? It's thin.
You know what I mean? I feel comfortable with you. I'm not worried about it, but
No, I don't even kill bugs.
Oh, you're good.
I'm radically opposed to killing anything. And I do see a certain degree of sociopathy in me, not in a pathological sense, but in the ability to see death and to see the most gruesome things of all, and still do the job. And that part of the reason for the detachment and how I convinced myself to develop it is that I couldn't do the job well if I were not sufficiently detached. If I got emotional about every murdered young woman, I wouldn't be in the observing head. I wouldn't be in the analytical head. I'd be in an emotional state. So for the victim's sake, I dropped my emotions. You know, the problem, though, is that you can't just turn off one emotion. They all go off. So I was a lousy partner in a relationship. I went through many, many relationships where they said, you know, you don't talk. You're mean. You're sullen. What's the matter with you? Nothing. What the hell do you mean? I'm fine. Wow, what an answer.
Yeah, right. So those reactions, is it because you think is it a blend of both? You're just because emotions are shut off, or it's because of what you've seen, or both?
I shut them off because they're painful.
Yeah.
It's painful to see people murdered, especially those that you can relate to, children, young women. I was young then. If you shut off the emotion of horror, shock, grief, sadness, fear, then with that goes love, tenderness, caring, communication. I was always a poor communicator. I don't like to talk very much, despite what you're hearing right now.
There we go.
But that made it so much worse. I figured I can't tell you what I'm feeling right now. I can't tell you what I saw today, but you can see it on my face. So I expect you to read my mood, respect it, and do something about it.
You want me to do something about it?
It's so unfair, to a partner. Can you imagine?
Yeah.
Can you imagine being with someone like that? It's awful.
So where are you now with that? Are you still in that same boat like you just said? Or you
No,
feel like,
I'm better. I'm so much better.
what are you doing? What do you do better? Is it communication? Expressing how you feel?
Sure, I try very hard. I've been through tons of therapy. You know, the World Trade Center Health Consortium gives us therapy for PTSD, and God bless these people. They've done so much for us. But I also try to change my attitude. We can't help what happens to us, but we can choose our attitude toward it.
Right.
And so I do choose my attitude about my work. I say that was then, it was awful. What am I going to do today? Mm-hmm. And so I do try to surround myself with things of beauty. My grandchildren are the best cure in the world. I'm so in love with them that it colors the entire world for me. Mm-hmm. When things are bleak, I think about them playing tennis or baseball, and I'm better. So,
yes, it goes back to that choice. But damn, you've seen some shit. So it's like, I've only seen things online here and there. I haven't seen too much violence like that, thankfully, in at least the real world of seeing what I see. But yeah, I think that's why I was fascinated talking. Like the psychology of it all really fascinates me, and I think it all kind of ties together with just the umbrella of death and the reality of the world. And I'm not saying we have to focus on that. I'm not saying this is for everyone. Like I think people choose to turn a blind eye to that. I think that's fine too. I just wonder how much that manifests in the reality of the world when they do find out, if it hits them harder. So I don't know. This conversation is fascinating to me, and a hard transition, but not quite a full transition. What's your opinion on New York right now? Because I feel like there's certain cities and whatnot, and New York gets a bad rap of the state it's in. But I come here all the time when I visit back east. I always spend a day or two in New York. I love New York, so I don't see it on a day-to-day basis. When I come here, it still feels like New York to me. But where's the crime rate with New York right now? What's the state of New York City?
It's perceptual that things are really bad right now. Statistically, that's not necessarily borne out, but because of social media and the constant 24-hour-a-day coverage of everything that happens, it seems like Every 15 minutes, someone's being pushed onto the subway tracks. Every 6 minutes, someone's being shot by a stray bullet in the projects.
From the perception of social
So
media.
the perception is that it's happening constantly. But statistically, we know that it's not. But yet, it affects me very badly. I'm pissed off. I'm like, what the hell's going on in my city? Well, why don't we have cops on every corner? Why aren't we out there, with video cameras on every single building? Why aren't we doing that? Why are we cutting the number of police officers trained every year? Ramp it up. I'm pissed because I'm at an age when I feel a little fragile. In the old days, I could punch a motherfucker right in the mouth and not care, right? Now, I'm not sure my shoulder's going to go back that far, see? So I feel a little fragile. I feel a little vulnerable. I take the subway, but I stand right in the middle there, nowhere near that platform.
Right.
When I cross the street, I stand way back to make sure there's no traffic. Nobody's going to push me in front of a bus.
Mm-hmm.
And when I see crazy, people acting crazy or violent or threatening, move to the next car or just get off.
Mm-hmm.
I'm pissed off. I want more law and order. The bail reform that happened was something that was necessary. People were being held for years on minor charges for the inability to come up with $300. That's wrong. But they've gone a step too far in releasing people who've done violent crimes without any bail, just releasing them back out into the streets.
So the one step too far is the fact there's people that are committing violent crimes and people that are non-violent crimes.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
yeah. I don't want to hold someone in jail for, stealing beer off a grocery store shelf, but damn it, if somebody's attacked a person on the street, there's no way I want them cut loose.
Right.
Even if there's some justification for it. Oh, he looked at me funny. No, he didn't. You're an asshole and you punched him. Okay, now get back in jail.
Yeah.
That's how I feel. And I'm getting very radical in my old age.
Are you involved in, are you involved in a legislation aspect or judicial approach, or is just kind of like, do you have your opinions?
No, I have my opinion, and I get formats like this.
Yeah.
I do a lot of interviews.
That's why I asked. I was curious. I figured I had something to say about it. So would you say the violence isn't per se, or the crime isn't going up, but perhaps the methods of crimes and the types of crimes have changed? Like, is there like more frequent people getting pushed? I know it's been around in New York City, but someone made a comment of that sort of, it's not necessarily the crime increasing, it's just the type that's happening right now?
Yeah, there's a little bit more of that senseless craziness of walking up to a woman and punching her in the face and then just walking away. That's like what is that, a rite of passage or something? Is that your initiation into a gang? Well, actually, yes. Back in the day, when I was working as an investigator, there was a thing in the Bronx where in order to join any of the gangs, you had to go out and kill someone. So two little girls went out and killed a cab driver, a guy with 3 kids,
Jesus.
And I just saw that the other day, a 15-year-old killed an 18-year-old. They were feuding. I mean, you're seeing a lot more of that, these strange, and I blame social media for that. Mm-hmm. And a lot of stuff going on there that's just under the surface of kids learning about how to do violence from social media.
Yeah, it just gets, it's like they're posting the news, but then it just gets amplified. Yeah. There wants to be repeaters thinking this is a good idea. I don't know. I love New York City, so it sucks to see the images that are put out there. So I was curious from your opinion on where New York City is. So the answer is more.
It's a little crazy right now.
Yeah.
But, I love this city. It's my home. I'm not going to leave it. Unless, of course, nationally we go into a whole new phase of strange government. I will defend my city, and I think tourists should continue to come here, but they should be aware. That's all. Yes. Don't stand on the edge of the subway platform.
My mom's told me all my life to keep eyes in the back of your head, and she tries to give me pepper spray. I'm like, I'm good right now, Mom, but thank you.
You know what's better, actually, is hairspray.
Hairspray?
Sure. Hairspray in the little containers, the little travel containers. Hairspray is not only burning to the eyes, but it sticks. So it works pretty
But
well.
you can't miss. Like, I feel like you can't miss though. You really got to be spot on with that, right?
You got to be right in the face.
Pepper spray, you kind of get them if you miss a little bit, but hairspray, you got to be.
Yeah, but don't forget that pepper spray is going to get you too.
That's what I was in LA one time and there was some shenanigans going down the street. And all of a sudden my eyes were like, I saw some guys like wildly spray pepper spray and like during a fight. I was like, I feel like at least a block away. It was several hundred, a pretty fair distance. Where I just was kind of walking away, just like observing. All of a sudden I was like, whoa.
Yeah.
It wasn't that painful, but I was like, oh my God, I noticed it. I felt it from quite a distance away.
It's extremely painful.
Yeah, so for the other New Yorkers that are jaywalking, maybe use hairspray instead. Good advice. All right, so I want to thank you for being here, but before we get out of here, I'm curious, your name of your book is What the Dead Know?
What the Dead Know.
What do the dead know?
Learning about life as a death investigator in New York City. And what the dead know, they know two things. One is how they actually died. It's my job to listen to them and find out. But two, and most important, is that life is short, very short. Don't have regrets when you die. Don't say, oh, I wish I had spent more time with my kids. I wish I had done more fun things or worked less. Don't have those regrets. The dead know how short it is and how precious it is.
I love that, Barbara Butcher. I appreciate you being here and thank you for taking the time.
Thank you.
And as usual, if you want to find out more about her book, her information, I'll plug any links she gives me authorization to put at the bottom of the show notes. Wow. Thank you again. I appreciate your time. And guys, thank you again for another episode of Dead Talks. Until next time.
Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Dead Talks. Please do not forget to hit the subscribe button and also the notification bell. That'll give you updates as to when we post a new video, more episodes, and more content in general. We are streaming on all the major podcast platforms, including Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Pandora, and all that. And also find us on Instagram at Dead Talks Podcast or www.deadtalks.net. Thank you so much.